He had no army, no title, no crown. He was a dirty, illiterate peasant from the frozen edge of Siberia, a man most people crossed the street to avoid. He couldn't read. He couldn't write. He had no noble blood, no education, no fortune. And yet, by the end of his life, this man secretly stood at the very heart of the largest empire on earth. Ministers were appointed and destroyed on his word. An emperor feared him. An empress obeyed him completely. He didn't seize that power with armies or gold. He seized it through something far darker, a mother's deepest, most secret terror. He found the one weakness no one else could touch, and he made himself the only cure. This is the dark psychology of Grigory Rasputin. History remembers him as the Mad Monk. But here is your first surprise. Rasputin was never a monk. He never took holy vows. He never belonged to any monastery. The most famous title in his story is a lie. He was born around 1869 in a remote Siberian village, the son of a peasant. For most of his early life he was unremarkable, a rough, hard-drinking farmer. Then, sometime in his late 20s, something changed. He had a religious awakening, abandoned his old life, and became a wanderer, one of those ragged holy men who roamed Russia preaching, praying, and begging for bread. And he had one thing that no preacher could teach and no rival could copy: his eyes. Nearly everyone who met Rasputin described the same unsettling sensation. A pale, piercing stare that seemed to look straight through them, that made them feel exposed, understood, and strangely powerless. Some called it magnetic. Others called it hypnotic. His enemies called it the look of the devil. Whatever it was, it gave him a power over people that words alone never could. And he was about to carry that gaze into the most powerful palace in the world. To understand how a peasant conquered an empire, you first have to understand the empire's hidden wound. At the top sat Tsar Nicholas II, ruler of all Russia, a man who commanded millions but was, by nature, gentle, indecisive, and overwhelmed. Beside him stood his wife, the Empress Alexandra. She was proud, intensely religious, and deeply distrusted by the Russian court, a German-born outsider who never truly felt safe. And together they guarded a secret that could shake the entire dynasty. Their only son, Alexei, the heir to the throne, the future of the Romanov line, was desperately ill. He had hemophilia. His blood could not properly clot. The smallest bruise, the slightest fall, could trigger internal bleeding that doctors were powerless to stop. A scrape that any other child would forget could kill him. This was a state secret, hidden from the public. Russia could not know that its future emperor might die at any moment from a single accident. And so the most powerful couple on earth lived in constant, silent dread, watching their child, unable to protect him, surrounded by doctors who could do nothing. Into that terror walked Rasputin. Rasputin arrived in the capital, St. Petersburg, in the early 1900s, already trailing a reputation as a mystic and a faith healer. Through priests and well-connected aristocrats, he was eventually introduced to the royal family around 1905. And then something happened that no one could explain. When Alexei suffered his agonizing bleeding episodes, when the doctors gave up and the boy screamed in pain, Rasputin was brought to his side. He would sit with the child. He would speak softly. He would pray. And again, the bleeding seemed to calm. The pain eased. The boy survived. The most famous case came in 1912. At a hunting lodge in Poland, Alexei suffered a massive internal hemorrhage. For days he hovered on the edge of death. The doctors told the parents to prepare for the end. Last rites were read. In desperation, Alexandra sent a telegram to Rasputin, who was far away in Siberia. His reply was simple and absolute. The boy would not die. Tell the doctors to leave him alone and stop tormenting him. And against all odds, Alexei recovered. To modern eyes, there may be explanations. Rasputin's calm presence reduced the boy's stress, and stress can worsen bleeding. By ordering the doctors away, he may have stopped treatments, like the newly fashionable aspirin, that actually made the bleeding worse. Perhaps it was suggestion. Perhaps it was simply timing. But to Alexandra, none of that mattered. She had watched a holy man save her son when the finest doctors in the empire had failed. From that moment, her faith in him was total and unbreakable. To her, Rasputin was no longer a man. He was a gift from God. And to harm him would be to doom her son. That belief would become the most powerful political weapon in Russia. Here is the first dark principle Rasputin understood better than almost anyone in history. You do not gain power by being useful. You gain power by being irreplaceable. Rasputin never made himself merely helpful to the royal family. He made himself the single thread on which their entire world hung. As long as Alexei lived, Rasputin had to live. As long as the boy might bleed, the mystic could never be cast aside. He had woven himself into the family's deepest fear, and you cannot remove the one person you believe is keeping your child alive. This is the trap of indispensability. The moment people believe that only you can solve their most terrifying problem, you stop being a servant and become a master. They no longer control you. You control them through their need. And Rasputin understood something even colder. He never had to threaten anyone. He never had to demand. The Empress did the work for him, because the alternative, losing him and then losing her son, was unthinkable. The strongest chains are the ones people put on themselves. He had made a grieving mother dependent on him, and through her, he reached the throne. Now watch how that single relationship turned into real, terrifying power. Rasputin never held an official position. He was never a minister, never a general, never a member of the court. On paper, he was nothing. And that was exactly what made him so dangerous. Because the Empress trusted him above all others, his words began to shape the empire. He would suggest that a minister was loyal, or that another was a threat, and Alexandra would press the Tsar to act. Officials rose and fell based on whether Rasputin approved of them. Men who insulted him lost their careers. Men who flattered him were promoted. He wrapped all of it in the language of the sacred. He wasn't scheming, he insisted. He was simply God's humble servant, sharing what the Lord revealed to him. And because the Empress believed his power was holy, to question Rasputin was to question God himself. This is the second principle. When people believe your authority comes from something higher than themselves, they stop judging your decisions. Faith silences doubt. A man with no army and no title was now steering the appointments of a continent-spanning empire, not because he had force, but because he had belief. But power built on fear and faith has a fatal flaw. It tempts you to push too far. In 1914, the First World War erupted, and it would tear Rasputin's web wide open. The war went badly for Russia. Millions died. And in 1915, the Tsar made a catastrophic decision. He left the capital to personally take command of the army at the front. It was meant to inspire the troops. Instead, it removed him from his own government, and left the Empress Alexandra effectively running the empire in his absence. And standing at Alexandra's shoulder was Rasputin. For the next 2 years, the influence reached its peak. Ministers were appointed and dismissed in dizzying succession. Competent men thrown out, weak and loyal ones installed, often on Rasputin's advice. The government fell into chaos at the exact moment Russia needed it most. And the people noticed. Rumors spread like wildfire. Stories of Rasputin's drinking, his women, his wild behavior filled the streets. Whispers, almost certainly false, spread even about him and the Empress herself. It didn't matter whether the rumors were true. What mattered was that the entire nation now believed a corrupt Siberian peasant secretly controlled the crown. The monarchy's prestige, built over 300 years, was crumbling. And in the eyes of Russia's nobility, there was only one way to save it. Rasputin had to die. In December 1916, a group of aristocrats led by Prince Felix Yusupov hatched a plot to kill him. And the night that followed became one of the most famous death stories in history. According to the legend, they lured Rasputin to a palace and fed him cakes and wine laced with cyanide, enough to kill several men. They waited for him to collapse. But he kept talking, kept drinking. The poison seemed to do nothing. In a panic, Yusupov shot him in the chest. Rasputin fell. But when they returned to the body, the legend says, his eyes opened, and he lunged at his killers, before staggering out into the snow. They shot him again. And again. Finally they bound him and pushed his body through a hole in the icy river. For a century, people have told this story as proof that Rasputin was almost impossible to kill, a man of supernatural strength. But here is the truth the autopsy revealed. The poison and the unkillable struggle were almost certainly exaggerations. Much of the drama came from Yusupov's own later memoirs, written to make himself a hero. The real cause of death was simpler and colder, a gunshot wound to the forehead. A single, precise shot. The myth made him a monster. The evidence made him a murdered man. But by then, the legend had already grown far larger than the truth. exactly as it had his entire life. And there is one final, chilling piece to this story. Not long before his death, Rasputin is said to have written a letter, a dark warning to the empress. He predicted that he would be killed before the new year, and he claimed that if he were murdered by the nobles, by the Tsar's own relatives, then the royal family would not survive him. He warned that within 2 years, the throne would fall, and the Romanovs would be destroyed, that none of them would remain. History fulfilled it with terrifying precision. Just months after Rasputin's murder, in early 1917, revolution swept Russia. The Tsar was forced to abdicate. The 300-year-old Romanov dynasty collapsed. And in July of 1918, barely a year and a half after Rasputin's body was pulled from the ice, the entire royal family, including the sick little boy he had once kept alive, was executed in a cellar. The man who built his power on a family's fear had foreseen that family's end, and his own. So what does Rasputin really teach us? That power has almost nothing to do with rank. He held no office and commanded no soldiers, yet he climbed higher than nearly any noble in Russia. Because he understood the one thing that titles can't buy, he found the deepest fear of the most powerful people in the world, and he made himself the only answer to it. That is the dark engine beneath so much influence. Not strength, not force, dependency. The person who controls what you fear most, and who convinces you that only they can save you, owns you completely, no matter how powerful you think you are. Rasputin's rise should make you ask an uncomfortable question about your own life. Who do you believe is irreplaceable? And is that belief real? Or is it a cage someone built for you, one fear at a time? If this changed the way you see power, subscribe. Because here, we don't study history to escape the past. We study it to understand the people around you right now. And to see these same dark tactics in the hands of history's greatest strategists, watch our videos on Machiavelli and Sun Tzu next.